Those are by far the best books on covert hypnosis I have ever found. Some of them are pretty light and some of them are kind of controversial. We will go through the whole list and you can find for yourself what you need the most right now to influence anyone at will. The number one is pretty known. It is an NLP book called Transformation by Richard Bandler and John Grinder, to not be confused with the next version of Transformation, which was only by Bandler, but not this one. I'm talking about the first one. I think it was the best summary for me of how exactly does conversational hypnosis works when you have somebody in front of you. What is the main way to use words and intonations and different verbal and nonverbal behaviors to make somebody's unconscious mind change even without them knowing. And one of the best things with this book, along with all the other old Bandler Grinder books, is that they were pretty often demonstrating the conversational techniques as they were describing them, which was really clever. And so in the transcript and in the book you can play, as I did, at figuring out which language pattern are they using at this moment when they say this, when they say that. A few very important things I grasped from that book that really helped me immensely were to, for example, increase suggestions, or should I say increase the assertiveness of your suggestions slowly. Many hypnotists have trouble figuring out where they stand based on the client. What the book was outlining was to use the language of probability, like could, eventually, maybe, might, I wonder, could you, would you be able to? All those things when you talk about something you are not sure of, or if you talk about the main problem of the person, or if you want to help somebody change and you don't know yet if they are ready to hear about the real thing you want to tell them, use this language. And once you have noticed, they were pretty much compliant, you are in rapport, when you move, they move with you, whatever you say, they nod their head. Okay, now you can go into way more assertive language, like because you will, now you are, since you are here, you can naturally right now, I know you are going to go into a trance in a minute. After you have been hypnotized, this is what will happen. People would refute if you were using that too early before they trust you. But once you have a good level of rapport, you can use model operators that are way more assertive, like will, now, can, be, because, all those things. But when you are still working on eggs, you use could, eventually, if you have the possibility, in might, one day, those things. And you can start with easy suggestions first. Things like you can feel your body getting heavier in the chair, you may feel lighter every time you inhale. Basic physical sensations. If you hypnotize somebody, very basic physical sensations. And once they are, you can see that when you say the shoulders drop, you can see them doing like this. Okay, if their body is reacting to what you say, it means basically their unconscious mind and their physiology is in rapport with your words and your voice. Therefore, you can higher up the level and use bolder suggestions, like, and now you can access that part of you that makes you cry like a baby all the time, which would be a very difficult thing to access for like a man in his 40s. Very difficult to accept that. But if you have seen that you had used some induction, whatever, and their body is perfectly following what you say, or their behavior is perfectly following what you say, then you can go into bolder suggestions like that, like now you can unveil the deep wounded child in yourself, whatever. It is easier if you have been going step by step up to here. And that is another key from that book I got, the nonverbal checking. So you are in deep rapport when there is a positive nonverbal response literally every time you give a suggestion. So whenever you say take one firm breath like this, or head nod in your direct, or like when you talk about the head nodding and their head naturally does that even before they say anything, Okay, when whatever you say is connected to what they do, then you know you are in deep rapport and you can accelerate toward the positive change, because now you have a green light. You can say the most outrageous things ever. That is something Bandler does many times in a big seminar room. He's going to use more, fun and light stories in front of the audience. And once everybody has laughed once or twice, then he can go into more brutal language, because he has rapport. If when he talks people laugh, okay, now he knows that he is in the right position. He can say whatever he wants, close to, and it is going to go by in their unconscious, because now he makes them react. And the last one that is drastically outlined and portrayed in many examples in the book is the importance of the vocal tonality, specifically in terms of matching the voice tonality of your client. Maybe not the you don't need to be an imitator, but like at least matching the tempo, or if it is too difficult for you because you have some constricted voice or whatever, at least matching the tonality. It can be easier to match the tonality, at least on a few words, or to speak a bit lower like that, eventually on certain words. It doesn't need to be done the whole session and to not do that like a monkey, but the point is, the closer you can go toward mimicking the person in front of you, specifically with your voice, the faster your voice will be imprinted in their head, which can be controversial, I know, but at some point their unconscious mind may not differentiate what you say and what they say to themselves, meaning that your positive suggestions will go unconscious and they will be used as an internal dialogue later when they will think again about the session. If you have been talking to them with the same voice tonality or like the same vocal expressions, they will remember your words much more than if you were always disconnected from their nonverbal behaviors. Number 2 is technically not a book. Some suspense here. It is not a book, it is more a collection of articles, collection of drafts, text. It was coming back to the old pickup days when the book The Game came out, and there was this infamous character called Intense. That was a word play in number 10. SE, intense, coming back to the idea of creating intense sensations when he was seducing somebody. But the point was, I read so many examples of NLP used in a conversation, because he was talking about what he used to say to women to seduce them. But it was really so well outlined of, when I said this, it was an encore because of that. When I said this, it was a fractionation because of this. Just having such a detailed breakdown of how can you incorporate in all your phrases a technique here, a technique there, it really made my skills skyrocket, because now I had a clear example of how to use it in a real conversation. In many NLP books, it is like programming language for computers, and human beings don't work like a computer. At least in many cases, they don't. They are much more emotional and irrational. So having on here an actual structure and seeing examples, it really made me improve drastically, made me connect the dots with, okay, this technique about presupposition, this is how it can be used in a real context, and this is not how it was outlined in the old books I read. It was really a great resource for me. So I don't know if you can still find that PDF somewhere on the internet. Maybe you can. Intense Archives if you want to look for that. But basically, some of the things that really helped me in therapy sessions, because I used many of those seduction concepts in therapy sessions without the outcome of seducing somebody, but with the outcome of shifting the limitation. So in seduction, it was always, okay, she doesn't want to sleep with me. How can I turn around this resistance? Of course, not in a rapist way or anything. It was more like a playful game, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work anyway. So it's not like you have to force somebody. But the way they were turning around conversations was really interesting, and I applied exactly the same concepts in a therapy session with the problem of the client, presupposing whenever he was saying, okay, whenever she resists, whenever she says no, it is just that a part of them doesn't know me well enough. I applied the same concept. Okay, I am with a client in therapy. Whenever they say they won't change, it's impossible, they are fucked up. Okay, in my head, I made the analogy, same thing. It's just a part of them that is resistant. And how can I turn around this? And I used the exact same language skills, and it worked incredibly well. So a big concept he talks about many times is fractionation, which was made bigger than real life, in my opinion, in all those books about fractionation, you can fractionate the mind of a girl and get her. This is not that, it's not like a magical evil thing, it's just a technique that can be used, but it won't get you like mind control. I think there's a lot of overhype in the whole marketing around seduction books. There's a lot of hype too. It is helpful, it can be used when you are advanced with NLP techniques, but it's not like a magic bullet either. But it is really interesting. So fractionation, the idea of fractionating the mind into parts, more specifically, whenever the person is being resistant, as I outlined, it's not the person who is being resistant, it is only a part of them. So how can you technically fractionate, which is just about asking a question in the end? It's not like a magical weird thing, it's just asking a question. Which part of you is responsible for that? If I am in a session with a client, the person says, I could never stop drinking. Which part of you do you think is responsible for your drinking problem? And I started using that in therapy exactly after I read that book. So it was really connected to me. And it can also be used in terms of creating the resource or using what is already available inside the head of the client, but too deep to really be used, or they don't have access to how powerful they really are. So you can say things like, which part of you could get out of that easily? If there was a part of you that has all the solutions for this, which part of you is that? And whenever I was saying that to clients, they went, oh, like they had a big bright idea of something they had done when they were 12 years old, and oh, I could do that. So it was an interesting concept, and that I had never seen broken down like this in a real conversation. I had heard obviously about fractionation or reframing and parts reframing in books, but it was always really theoretical and not that much outlined. Another thing I got from this book was a specific use of rhetorical questions. So questions where basically you know the answer, things like feeling good is positive in your life, isn't it? Of course it is, but the point of doing that is building up the yes set, building up the responsibility of your subject so that their unconscious mind responds much more to your suggestions. For example, whenever I could find a resource, therefore, in my client's life, in a therapy session, I have somebody and we start getting somewhere with the outcome because they start to tell me, yeah, I could do this, or like I could be more motivated, for example, and I could ask more rhetorical questions like, do you think this can keep going in your life? And obviously they want to say yes, so I know I'm just building up the resource and building up the representation of them being able to use that every time they will need it. Or then we can build up into, not rhetorical, but just questions to help consolidate this part of them that has positive resources with, for example, in which situation in the future will you have access to this again? Or in which situation in the future can you have access to this again? This is basically helping their mind to fortify the representation of them using this positive thing again in the future. Or a last one which was used in cold reading in the way it was explained, but same thing, I used some principles around that, using the yes set. So building up the yes response, you like chocolate and you want to quit cigarettes and you would like the world to be a better place. Yes, yes, yes. And now could you tell me something that will make your life change by tomorrow? This is something less easy to reply to, but if you have been building up the response first, they will reply more easily. Number 3 is technically not a book about NLP or hypnosis or covert hypnosis. It was a book about social engineering, but that also really helped me to figure out human nature and the basic leverages, the basic things we can use in somebody's head to make them give you the response you are looking for. It is called The Art of Deception by Kevin Mitnick, who was one very infamous and then famous hacker who was one of the first ones to play with computers and who was the first one to be arrested by the FBI back in the day. And he wrote a book explaining, so The Art of Deception, explaining that in many cases, hacking the technology is the hardest part ever, but hacking the human being is the easiest part ever, because machines are programmed to not make mistakes. They still do, but they are programmed to not make mistakes. Humans are so emotional that they make mistakes all the time anyway. And again, it was kind of a dark, controversial book, because you could say, oh, it is only for scams. Yeah, but you can use the same principles just to help people. You can use all the leverages, all the pillars, the methods he was using to bypass people's resistance to not give to him the password or whatever. You can use the same tactics with the client in therapy, and specifically the same mindset of I'm going to turn around the resistance, to find how can the client change easily and positively as of right now. The hacking mindset plays a big part into how can you use covert hypnosis, because whatever you say, no script will ever work all the time with everybody at any time. People are just too emotional and too irrational to respond like machines. Therefore, this mindset of, okay, I'm gonna see what the system gives me and how can I find a flow to hack through the resistance up to the point where I find the password. That is a great analogy for how can you conduct a session as a hypnotherapist. I'm going to hack through all the flow. I'm going to hack through the system, being the brain, the mind of the person, until I find a flow. And the flow is basically one phrase you will say to open a limiting belief that will make you get to the password, meaning the solution for your client, basically. That was a great analogy from me. And for example, he was having a strong intent with information gathering, which happens in the same way in a therapy session. So he details really well in his process to evaluate his interlocutor and see where the flow is with that person. So if it is a young man, obviously you can impress him with some badge of authority, or mentioning you work for Apple, for Steve Jobs, for Microsoft. Just mentioning that to a small tech guy in Silicon Valley could be enough to get them to tell you everything. But if it was a manager, you would use the other methods. And as a therapist, you can use the exact same process to uncover the limiting belief of your client. And always, the habit I got from this is to always keep your ears open for where is the flaw in that statement. Whatever they said, where is in that statement the thing I can use to find my way through the password, basically. And the idea of changing his vocal tonality that he was doing many times, therefore with low-level employees on the phone to get them to give him passwords and stuff, he was often changing his vocal tonality and speaking like a manager of a big firm, which is way more intimidating with people. And he said the way this worked the best was with police officers or military guys, because those guys are so trained to obey authority that if you just present yourself as a captain or a sergeant or a lieutenant, they're going to do everything you want, because they are so conditioned to not question authority above them, that if you can portray on the phone that you are somebody of that authority, there's no way they are going to resist. That is obviously a tricky manipulative maneuver for scams and social engineering, but basically you can use the same thing as a therapist. For example, if you have trouble, some legitimacy problem, you feel like an imposter sometimes because you don't think you are good enough, sure, can you take the voice tonality of an advanced hypnotist or an advanced NLP practitioner? Who do you have in your head an example of somebody who is extremely advanced, and how could you use the same vocal tonality? Because I will tell you, the more you use the tonality of somebody who is not you, the more you will access their ways of thinking, their ways of interpreting the reality, and their ways of reframing what doesn't work. So using a different tonality, even just for the sake of practicing, will help your brain to unveil the things you didn't find a solution for yet. Book number 4 is called, obviously, Sleight of Mouth, that you probably know about. It is a pretty famous one. And again, same thing, it is not technically about covert hypnosis in the way we have it in the traditional movies, where this is a guy who speaks slowly and is going to go behind your back mentally. It is not about subtle reframing of something, it is more about the technical structure of rhetoric, of how can you argue against somebody in a debate, for example. But it is basically the thought process behind any type of successful reframing. So all the things that I have talked about so far, minus maybe the non-verbal changes, which is another category, but anything that is linguistic, rhetorical questions, the pacing and leading, any kind of statement where you use what people think is true and reframe it, all those things, the main the deep structure of all of that is sleight of mouth, basically. Or should I say, you can explain every other language pattern on earth with sleight of mouth principles. But the thing with sleight of mouth is that it is more about how can a statement change based on what the previous statement was, if that is clear for you. Which means that sleight of mouth are not really language patterns by themselves, they are replies, answers to a limitation. So a statement by itself coming from the sleight of mouth model may mean nothing. However, if I give you a script, a text of an argument between two people, and we break down line by line what was being said and how the frame changed during each of those phrases, then you can see sleight of mouth in action. Because it is more the verbal ping pong, the art of sleight of mouth is more the verbal ping pong than the art of speaking hypnotically. I would say both go hand in hand anyway, because permissive language, so from the traditional hypnotic way of talking, permissive language, could you find a way, could another part of you find a mysterious way to talk to your unconscious mind? All those things are sugarcoating the resistance of people when they are like in a negative state, and sleight of mouth is like, let's say below that, the structure of what are you going to say next. And once this structure is clear in your head, what are you going to say next? Then this next thing you're going to say, you can say it with hypnotic language, which will make it bypass conscious resistance more easily. But understanding frames and how people interact within frames, and realizing that you can, at any moment you can shift the frame to shift the outcome of the conversation and shift the limitation, that was a great improvement in my communication skills. However, I wouldn't say I had access to this understanding before like a few years into NLP, because in the beginning it was way too confusing for me. However, and this will come into book number 5, a book that was, I guess, one of the first ones to outline some sort of sleight of mouth in real context. It was actually a guy who was linked with this intense character. So the book is called Real World Seduction by Swing Cat. And some people who might get enraged about, oh, this is all manipulative. You know what? I don't believe the field of conversational hypnosis in NLP would be where it is today if the world of seduction hadn't appropriated themselves all of those concepts and try to make them move forward. Basically, when you understand economy, you understand the main things people pay for, or, you know, career improvement, or like more money, seduction, getting more love with people around them, and health, improving their body. Whenever a method, a tool, a solution arrives in the world that can improve one of those three, massive quantum leaps are going to be made in that field. A good example of that is right now AI, which is growing drastically every week because there is potentially a lot of money to make in many different ways with AI right now. So the field of AI is moving way faster than if no money could be made from it. The same thing with NLP. If no guys on earth had ever took the NLP concepts and tried to use them for seducing women, I can assure you we wouldn't have the understanding we have of NLP right now. And it wouldn't be that clear and that easy to use. So this book, Real World Seduction, same thing, it could appear manipulative to some extent, but you can use that with a very good positive intent in mind. And this book definitely made me understand concrete examples of how sleight of mouth can be used in a real conversation, which in turn, same thing, in turn, then I used it in therapy sessions. Training myself to use that during a date where you have to think really fast, it made every therapy session way easier later. Because I was already more trained to pay attention to the person, to figure out when they say this, what is the hidden frame behind what they say, what is the mental context within which they can talk about this limitation, then what do I need to say to get outside of this negative frame, get into a frame where solutions happen and the problem is not stuck. And reading books like those really helped me to figure out all those tricks and subtleties about how language works and how can you tweak a conversation. And whenever somebody thinks there is no option, this is the end, they are stuck, Actually, no, they are not stuck, but you need to have a clever language, clever enough to make them get out of their negative states of mind. So the cocky thing he was doing in that book was to reinterpret, reframe everything a girl says as if she was trying to chase him, as if he was the prize, which is a very common concept by now. So this is kind of the cocky way, which you can do in a way that will make girls more attracted, and you can go over the board where it is like going way too far and people would just think of you as an asshole. But it is always about calibrating to the person in front of you. There is a point up to which you can go and a point past which nothing good will happen. That is what you discover by using all those skills with people in front of you. And this book was also clarifying for me, okay, how do we deconstruct what somebody says into specific beliefs? How can we take one statement and notice what are the underlying beliefs that are hidden behind this statement? And from there, it can be easier to reframe. But many people try to use a sleight of mouth or covert language or whatever, but this is the outcome, but they don't clearly know where they are. Somebody says something and they just try to wing it with whatever comes to their mind, but they didn't understand what was the presupposition behind this limitation, behind the thing she or he said that was negative. What was the belief that made them say that? And as long as this is not clear in your head, it will always be confusing about what should I say next, because you don't understand where you are, what is the main belief you are dealing with. You may deal with the surface thing. Oh, I don't want to go to the movies. The main belief behind that is I don't think I will have a good time with you. It is what is behind the statement. The art of sleight of mouth is pretty much to figure that out automatically. Once you have done it consciously a few times on paper, like writing down some statements and figuring out how can you reframe that, then you can easily, more easily in a conversation, figure out he or she said that because he believes that X or Y. Then the next thing I need to say is this, the response to the belief, understanding the underlying assumptions behind their statements. That is how you improve your communication skills drastically. In the end, I would say calibrating the nonverbal attitude of the person is a shortcut to language, to understanding language, because understanding language is the long part, because you have to deconstruct word by word what was being said. You can accelerate that if you just notice the nonverbal aspect of the person, which is what we do once we are advanced. We just notice are they slouched back like this, are they like trying to be intimidating, what is their nonverbal language, and how does it change based on what I say. And from there I know how to make them change their assumptions, how to influence them, because I understand where they are mentally and what is my outcome based on what they are giving to me. Those books, I would put them on a pedestal when it came to figuring out how covert hypnosis works and how can I improve my language abilities to reframe any limitation, including my own. And this is a very important skill to improve in your life wherever you want to get. Hope you will get your skills improve faster with this. Read those books and I will see you soon in the next video.